Esto es Análisis BIVA.
¿Qué tal? Bienvenidas, bienvenidos. Mi nombre es Salvador Leal, director de Comunicación de la Bolsa Institucional de Valores, y es un gusto darles la bienvenida a un nuevo episodio de Análisis BIVA, un espacio de opinión y reflexión que hemos construido junto a los analistas más destacados del sector. Los invitamos a responder las preguntas que les dejaremos en la caja de preguntas de Spotify y a formar parte de nuestro canal de Telegram llamado Viva Reporta. Para encontrarlo solo tienen que ir al apartado de búsqueda, dirigirse a la parte de canales y escribir ahí Viva Reporta. Y no olviden seguirnos en todas nuestras redes sociales para estar al tanto de los datos y tendencias que mueven a los mercados. If you've been with us for a while, you know that we usually keep our conversations grounded in Mexico, its economy, its markets, its challenges and opportunities. But today, we're crossing the border because the global context demands it. And because our guest has a front row seat to some of the most important developments shaping the US and, by extension, the world. I'm thrilled to be joined by Charles Myers. He's founder and chairman of Signum Global, a firm known for its sharp political insight and strategic guidance at the intersection of markets and policy. Also, former vice chairman of Evercore, and he was very involved with the Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden's campaign just a few years ago. So while we'll keep Mexico in the rearview mirror, today's episode is all about what's happening in the US. So, Charles, thank you so much for being with us at Análisis BIVA, here at Análisis BIVA.
Great, Salvador. Thank you very much for having me.
Charles, to begin our conversation, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. The performance of the U.S. economy has global implication and often sets the tone for financial markets around the world. So with that in mind, what's the outlook for the U.S. Economy that you have from your seat?
So I remain very optimistic on the U.S. economy, on the outlook. I've been optimistic literally all year, even at a time earlier this year when consensus was actually more bearish, both for the economy and the outlook for the U.S. equity market. I've been very constructive. I remain very positive. I would argue that this year, the setup for the U.S. economy is one of the most positive in my career, and also, by extension, the U.S. equity market. And today we're hitting another record high in the U.S. equity markets. I think the equity markets are absolutely correct to be discounting this very positive outlook for the economy. And it really is several things that are ongoing. The first is the amount of stimulus, fiscal stimulus coming into the U.S. economy. We have, from the Biden administration, the CHIPS infrastructure and Inflation Reduction Act, $1.6 trillion of fiscal stimulus over 10 years that is flowing into the U.S. economy on an ongoing basis. We're going to repeal parts of the Inflation Reduction Act on Jan 1, but again, the overall amount of stimulus is very strong, about $150 billion a year. On top of that, we have now the one big beautiful bill from the Trump administration, which is even more stimulus on top. Yeah. And one of the biggest surprises in this tax bill, I would argue, is not that they got it done. Again, huge accomplishment, huge, congratulations to President Trump and the Republican leadership for getting this bill done with a very slim majority in Congress. But what was the surprise in the bill is how much of it is retroactive to this year. Mm-hmm. It is very stimulative. So on top of really enormous amounts of stimulus flowing into the U.S. economy on an ongoing basis and even more next year, we have several other very big positives. First, lower oil, massive win for the U.S. consumer because of heating oil and the price of gasoline. Very big positive. On top of that, weaker dollar. Very positive for some of our biggest export companies. Yeah. Also helps offset some of the cost of tariffs. On top of that, inflation, at least for now, is under control. We'll see if it picks up. It probably will a bit with tariffs, but so far under control. Relatedly, the Fed is going to cut at least once or twice this year. Rates likely to come down. On top of all of that, earnings are strong. Consumer confidence is up. Consumer spending is holding up. CEO confidence is up. And if all of that wasn't enough, we've got the most pro-growth, pro-deregulation administration, and I would argue pro-innovation U.S. administration in my lifetime with a massive deregulatory push in energy and financial services. This setup for the U.S. economy is the most constructive in my career, and I think it continues into next year.
But I must say that you also have these very important and very disruptive things with trade how we land with trade.
Yeah, so trade has been one of the biggest negative overhangs for both the markets and the economy. But when President Trump made the Liberation Day announcement, which was really incredibly bearish and quite amateurish, actually, as you know, the formula. The way I've been describing the tariff formula is something that my teenage son could have come up with. But the truth is, when those tariffs went into effect on April 9th, at midnight on April 9th, it took 13 hours of aggressive selling in the bond market, possibly coordinated, for the president to do a massive U-turn. And it really confirmed two things. First, the Trump put this time in this administration is actually in the bond market, not the equity market. Okay. In Trump 1, the Trump put was the equity market. This time, it's in the bond market. It's the 10-year. When the 10-year yield gets to 4.5, they get nervous. At 5 or higher, they blink, panic, U-turn, whatever you want to call it. The second good thing that happened on April 9th is it showed that the Trump administration will course correct where necessary. April 9th on tariffs was a massive climb down. And what I was saying on April 9th is that from that moment forward, almost all of the news flow on trade policy would be directionally positive. And it has been, including the very positive announcement of a deal with Japan last night. So, you know, and one other quick thing, Scott Bessent is meeting his counterparts from China in Stockholm next week. We will continue to de-escalate with China on trade. We have other issues with China, but overall, we will get to bilateral trade deals with all of our counterparties, including Mexico and Canada. And while we will have higher tariffs, I think the markets have already priced that in. I think our economy can absorb it. I think our consumers can, and I think that companies can as well. So net, while it's been the source of enormous amounts of policy volatility, market volatility, and has been an overhang, I think that from here, the markets have priced in most of it.
There are a few things. For example, the independence of the Fed comes to mind. That may not only disrupt, but change forever the landscape of the U.S. economy or how U.S. Does business. What's your take on that?
So I think the president's almost daily assault on the Fed chair, on the Fed as an institution, is not constructive at all. It's not helpful, but it is consistent. Meaning we have a president of the United States today that is running roughshod over many of our institutions. He is running roughshod over the Constitution. He's running over Congress, the Department of Justice, the media, the law, our universities, the law firms, our allies, and now the Fed. So at least it's consistent. Not good, but consistent. So what I've been saying on the Fed is I think what President Trump is trying to do is build a case to fire Chair Powell for cause and hoping that the chair will resign. That's the ideal scenario for President Trump. Yeah. I think Powell will stay in as long as he can, and you know, as a statement of independence, Fed independence, but also for his own legacy. So I think what happens is as we get to the September FOMC meeting, if the Fed doesn't cut rates at that meeting, then I think the president could move to try to fire the chair, to fire Powell. Then we're in a bit of a constitutional gray area, and it'll ultimately work its way up to the Supreme Court. We'll see which way it lands. But even if he replaces Powell in a worst-case scenario, as you know, the Fed chair is only one vote out of 12 on the FOMC on interest rates. Yes. So on the broader issue of Fed independence, I still feel very good that the Fed will remain independent, even though there's a real effort to undermine him and try to remove him.
Yeah. So maybe he's just like a target, so everything remains safe. Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. And one other quick thing, if I can, you know, at the end of the day, you know, the president, because President Trump had 4 years of experience from Trump 1, then he had 4 years sitting in Mar-a-Lago, kind of plotting and stewing and plotting his return. Yeah. He has come back to office or to power and really, with that experience, hit the ground running. As you know, he's issued more executive orders than any president in history, even those that have served 8 years already in 6 months. But he's also going to continue to push the boundaries of executive authority. He just will. And the attacks on the Fed chair is one part of it. Again, it's not good, but I think that the institutions broadly in the United States will hold, including the Fed and its independence.
I think that I cannot let you leave this studio without asking you about the midterms elections for 2026, because you have a very deep knowledge about how politics work in the U.S. And I think that for the people that hear us that would like to have information, or that they are craving info for investing or for being taking decisions, I think that this time American politics are very new. I mean, I don't know how to say it. It's a new show, very different that all the world was used to. So what are your these thoughts into the election of 2026?
So first, just to say, we are definitely in new territory politically with President Trump. Again, we have a president that is somewhat, depending on where you sit, a little out of control, but again, pushing the limits and often going over the line, crossing the line on executive authority. And in fact, really quickly before the midterms, just to say that most of the guardrails in the United States, or the checks on executive power, are not working, meaning Congress. The only guardrail that's truly working today in the United States is the bond market. Literally, the bond market, and it's the 10-year that is helping keep the president from doing some of the worst things that he might have an inclination to do. And we'll see how the bond market reacts to potentially firing Chair Powell, for example. I think that back on that really quickly, but on the broader issue of institutions, part of the reason Trump talks about it every day is he's trying to socialize and prepare the markets for potentially firing the chair, right? So, but in the end, on the midterms, the Democratic Party today is flat on its back. It has no money, no strategy, and no leadership. In fact, the approval rating on the Democratic Party is at a historic low. And by the way, it could get worse from here. But what I would say on the midterms is I would much rather be the Democrats going into the midterms than the Republicans, because while it could get a little bit worse for the Democrats over the next couple of months, directionally, I would make a bet that things are going to get better. Secondly, in a two-party system, the Democrats aren't going anywhere. Third, the Democrats already in 6 months have been given quite a bit to work with politically from President Trump. The three main areas of vulnerability for the Republicans going into our midterm elections next year are, first, in this tax bill, they have cut $1 trillion of the funding for the social safety net, for the most vulnerable Americans, Medicaid, SNAP, and other programs. That's a very big political liability for them. Secondly is immigration. While immigration may play well in some districts and some states, the way they're going about it, these incredibly aggressive and at times very extreme and often on camera tactics, might play well in some districts, in some states, but in other districts and states it plays very badly, understandably. And so I think that it will be an issue for them going into the midterm elections. A majority of Americans don't like masked men rounding up families, for example. So I think that's going to be an issue. And the last of many issues, but a third issue, is going to be the ethics or the corruption. The truth is, if you take a step back and just think for a moment that if your president, if Claudia Sheinbaum had accepted a $400 million airplane from an Arab state, imagine the reaction in this country. Imagine if her attorney general or the equivalent had approved that transaction. The level of conflicts of interest and corruption from this family, the Trump family, is off the charts. And you know, a lot of the conflicts of interest are in the crypto and digital asset space, where there's some very positive things happening, but the family, you know, is benefiting also. But my point is, a majority of Americans don't like these conflicts of interest and the corruption. And, you know, as we go into the midterms, it'll become more into focus.
Yeah.
So I feel good about that. I think the Democrats will take the House at a minimum. They only need to win a net 4 seats. The Senate is a tougher uphill battle for the Democrats. I think it probably stays Republican. But with divided government, then the House can start to put in some accountability, can start to exert itself as a co-equal branch of government with the executive, and hopefully some of the guardrails from Congress will kick in.
I just want to close this episode. You talked about briefly the topic of immigration. What's the view of how you are seeing Mexico from Washington? What's the view that Republicans or Democrats or even the general public have of our country?
Yeah, so first, you know, I'd say that in Washington and in the White House, but more broadly in the administration, in Congress, the view of the Sheinbaum administration is very positive. You know, she's worked, she did something very smart of many things, but one of the things that she did that was very smart was after, you know, Trump got elected, during the transition, she reached out and started to build a relationship with President Trump, or then President-elect Trump. And that was not only very constructive, but very smart. And since then, the relationship continues to be very good. We're going to have some real fireworks, unfortunately, as we head into the final stretch of the bilateral trade negotiation with U.S.-Mexico, U.S.-Canada, but we will get there. Mexico is an absolutely critical, not only economic, but increasingly national security partner of the United States, as is Canada. And as I've been saying my whole career, but I feel even more strongly today, the future of the United States, Mexico, and Canada is together. It has been, whether it's NAFTA, USMCA, or what will emerge after, these have been a home run for all three countries. The United States is very lucky to have, and it's really by accident of geography, our only two neighbors be incredibly friendly and constructive allies with further integration of our economy. I wanted to leave one last political risk with you, if I can.
Yeah.
To say, and I think it's the most underappreciated political risk in the United States, or underappreciated tail risk, which is not a third term for President Trump. Trump's not going to get a third term. He would like one, but it's not going to happen. My fear, or the risk, is actually the opposite. If something happens to him in the next 3.5 years, this is a 79-year-old white American male who has lived on cheeseburgers most of his life. Yeah. So the risk of a heart attack or stroke in the next 3.5 years is relatively high. Yeah. If something happens to him, incapacitation or death, we get J.D. Vance. And the issue with J.D. Vance is, I think, first, we don't know him because he's been a political chameleon. But secondly, he's 40 years old, and I think at his core, he is more protectionist, more populist, and even more protectionist than Trump. And so in what would be, at any time in history, a relatively volatile presidential transition, if it's very abrupt, with Vance could be even longer and more volatile or uncertain, because I think in that environment of uncertainty, China could test us on Taiwan with a maritime blockade, for example. I don't think J.D. Vance would defend Taiwan. So I worry actually more about something happening to Trump. I've been saying I've run against President Trump 3 times in 3 elections, but more than most Americans, I'm praying the man lives. No. We need him to live for another 3.5 years. What happens after that, it doesn't matter. But J.D. Vance is actually, to me, I think more concerning. In the end, we'll be fine as a country, and the institutions will hold. But as I've been saying, I really hope that President Trump makes it to the end of his term.
Charles, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Él es Charles Myers, founder and chairman de Signum Global Advisors. Si este episodio fue de su agrado, los invitamos a dar un like, dejar una reseña y compartirlo con sus contactos y amigos. Su apoyo nos ayuda a seguir creciendo y acercarles el mejor análisis económico y financiero. La producción de este podcast estuvo a cargo de Rogelio Unzueta, con el apoyo de nuestros ingenieros en audio y video, Héctor García y Omar Vieira. Yo soy Salvador Leal y esto fue Análisis BIVA. Nos escuchamos en el próximo episodio.
La Bolsa Institucional de Valores presentó Análisis BIVA. Suscríbete a nuestro podcast y síguenos en todas nuestras redes sociales.